So it's so good to see you, Claire. I'm really happy that we're able to have a conversation right now
Yeah.
in some interesting times.
You can say that again, hey, for at all levels. We're almost standing at a crossroads, I think, of humanity, of going down a good path or going down a challenging path.
I had a family reunion of sorts via like digital hangout with with family that we haven't been together, that all those extended family in like over a decade. So
Wow.
there's interesting things coming out of it all, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And I know for me, I've definitely, refocused and doubled down on what's important and made some positive changes. But yeah, I feel it's a tricky time. And, I saw your video that you made. I think you made a few videos, but I saw one of your videos that was very, sort of about this whole moment that we're in and conversations that people are having. And you really got me thinking about, this idea of polarization and how there's almost no room for discussion between
Yeah.
these two. Could you go into that a little bit? I mean, I'd love to hear you expand on that, and just for people
Sure.
who may be listening and how
Yeah, of course I
don't know
can.
what I'm talking about.
Exactly. Have we started yet?
I started recording right away. I figured I want to get every moment of your
Oh,
of
okay.
your
This is like
wisdom.
the outtakes.
Yeah, we can.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. We're not live, are we? If we
No, we're
are,
not. We're not. No, we're not live. We're not live. No, no.
yeah.
But
Okay. So, all right. Well, we'll just go with the flow then. Absolutely.
yeah,
It's Yeah,
happy
well, I
to.
did. I've made a number of videos, and even I am surprised at the level of polarization regarding those,
Mhm.
where all discussion, any argument counter to the fact that we have this deadly virus going on, that we're all going to die, that we should listen to. Sorry, I've got a fly person who's just joined us. Should listen to the health departments who have been lying to us for years and telling 99% of the population to eat a diet that's killing them. Suddenly everybody believes them,
Mhm.
including a lot of vegans.
Mhm.
But what it's actually doing is stopping real discussion. There's this fear and reductionism that goes on for people to want to decide very quickly what's going
Mhm.
on.
Mhm.
And of course, you're seeing it yourself, Jason. This is what happens when people are in fear
Mhm.
of uncertainty and fear of death.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
think for a lot of people, it's the first time they are facing their own finitude is actually, oh my gosh, I'm going to die. Well, yes, you are going to die, and so am I. We don't want to do it prematurely, of course. And suddenly this outside oppressor is going to kill us. In fact, even Donald Trump in one of his press conferences recently said, no death is acceptable. So
Mm.
even we can't even die of old age these days. It's
Mm.
perfectly unnatural. It happens into every living being that comes on the earth, but we're going to be invincible and not let it happen. So I think we're avoiding the reality of our finitude.
I find you extremely, just hearing you speak right now and hearing you in your video and all the things that you're, posting on Facebook. I follow you. I really enjoy the sort of angles that you're throwing out there. And, it's just, I worry that right now people are almost just not allowed to have certain conversations, because
Yeah.
to almost have the conversation and to ask the question, it's like it goes against the sort of, status quo and like how everybody should be dealing with it. And, and it's not
Yeah.
to say that we want to necessarily jump down the rabbit hole of every single conspiracy theory and believe every single one of those, because that's the other side of it too, right? You have these two sides where it's like people seem to be either
Yeah.
this is the way things are, standard story, or everything is don't believe anything, don't, like you can't.
Yeah.
So but
Yeah.
I appreciate your perspective in sort of, asking some important questions and drawing attention to some important issues. But let's backtrack a little bit. I want to introduce you for people who maybe aren't familiar with you, but if in case you are not familiar with the legendary Clare Mann, could you just maybe say a few words about yourself, just so that people have a bit of context?
Yeah. I've never been called legendary. It just means I'm probably very old. It's
No, I think your contribution, what
yeah.
you continue to contribute, and what you have contributed to the vegan movement, and in terms of providing resources for vegans, and just, yes, a lot of interesting, ideas that I think, have affected me, and I think have affected the way that a lot of vegans think. So that's why I say legendary. And I think that's in a positive way, for sure. I think you've helped a lot of people. I mean, your book Vistopia, this whole idea around, you know, the difficulties that come being a vegan in a non-vegan world, the way that you think and talk about that, I think that is, you've done a lot of service for a lot of people. So that's why I say legendary. But yes, so you wrote this book, Vistopia. You've done a whole bunch of other stuff. What should people know about you?
What should people know about me?
Mm-hmm.
That I'm an animal rights campaigner.
Uh-huh.
That's my biggest, most humbling mission in life at this stage in my life, because I've always wanted to I had a father and a mother who questioned, you know, why are we really here? You know, really, is it, as my father used to say, 70 years in 10, which probably was said in the Bible, and that's it? You know, what are we here for? So I always felt that whatever job we're doing, whether we're sweeping the streets or we're on the world stage, we, by example, can show people how to live, because nobody has a monopoly on the truth here.
Hmm.
You know, we don't really know why we're here. You know, is it karma? Is there an afterlife? Is there before life? And so everyone struggles to try to find what's going on. And there's no shortage of people trying to tell us what is the truth, of course. But ultimately, we are in our aloneness to say, well, what is this really all about? And I will start with a feeling I have that is directing my life in many ways, which is an intuitive feeling of right and wrong in many ways. And people may have heard the story before, but when I was 8 years old, of a vintage where children played in the park and it was absolutely okay, and perhaps your brother looked after you and picked you up at some time to, you know, make sure you went home for lunch or something. But I was at a park called the Blockhouse Park in the south of England. And for some reason I was on my own, perhaps separated from friends. And I heard this sort of marauding group of male voices behind like a shelter, which was it was called the Blockhouse, and it had a whole moat actually, which had all dried out, and children used to play there. It was great. And there was this sort of crowd behind. And then I heard a sound I will never forget. And it was a sound of an animal in pain. And I can't remember, perhaps it's a romantic story, but I remember running towards it because someone needed my help, an animal needed my help. I was a big animal lover. And I climbed up the steps, these concrete steps, and had to turn back and look into the shelter. And there was a load of lads there, sort of teenagers, yelling and screaming and sort of encouraging someone. And someone had taken this poor dog and viciously twisted their leg and forced it back down through the slats in the seat.
Oh.
And so what I did was to immediately push through these boys, release the animal, because it was trying to release itself, but the more it did what it wanted to do, it was actually going to dislocate its hip.
Right.
It needed to do the opposite direction. And the dog ran away. But then something happened. I remember turning around, looking up at these boys and screaming, "How dare you? Don't you ever do it again." Now, that feeling that has followed me throughout my life. Now, luckily, I had parents that didn't. They put aside their fears for their 8-year-old child with a crowd of marauding boys, testosterone-filled lads, and they put that aside, and they said, my dad said, you must always do what is right. Now, that similar feeling has followed me, and I realize it's dystopia, really. And when I first found out at 17 what happened in a slaughterhouse, and I dared to look, I immediately gave up meat, because this feeling comes from within me. And then when that comes up, I respond to that, because it's really about justice. It's about doing the right thing. So I guess that's followed me throughout my life, whether I'm working with people or animals or planet or so that sort of sets the bit of the context, I guess.
I like that.
But I've been a psychologist for 30 years. Was fascinating with what made people tick. I'm still asking the question, what makes people tick? They still amaze me, which is great, but also how stuck people can be as well, and give away their power to social and cultural myths and unquestioned assumptions of this is what we must do. And so, yeah, as a psychologist, I was actually an organizational psychologist originally and worked in corporate life until I found out what was really going on and the lengths people will go to for a buck. But there was no way I was going to sell my values. So I came out of that and moved more into sort of therapeutic and clinical work. And then I called myself a vegan psychologist in the last 10 years, largely because people sought me out and said, well, how can I see someone who's not vegan? You know, and not that makes me any special. There's a lot of very skilled therapists, but if they really got what was going on, they'd have to be vegan, of course. They would have to be, or else they're a psychopath. So they obviously don't. And I think it's one of those things when you see a psychologist or a counselor or therapist, they don't have to have had the experiences you've had. They have to have had sufficient life experiences. But when it comes to veganism or non-veganism, you either are part of the solution or part of the problem. You can't be neutral on this. Unless you take active steps, as you know, you will contribute to the cruelty. So whereas if you disagree rightly with child abuse or with violence or sexism, it doesn't interfere with the rest of your life. You don't practice those principles, but we have to eat. And unless you make active steps, you're going to be contributing to the cruelty or not.
Mm. That's so interesting. The whole path that you've come down, and the fact that you're now in the position where you are today, where you're helping so many people. And I think there's a real need for your perspective, like the perspective of a vegan psychologist. And, you know, you're obviously not shy about taking to social media and putting your opinion out there. And I think that is something that, yeah, it goes a long way, definitely goes a long way. And I'm sure that the people that you work with on a more, you know, one-to-one basis, that, you know, that's even more useful. And I mean, you know, you're able to be contextual to each person, right? So that, yeah, you can really help people see, you know, the sort of broader concepts that you talk about in some of your videos and some of your content, and just sort of break that down, you know, for individuals. So you do, you know, one-on-one counseling, one-on-one sessions. You're still doing that. And, you know, if people are interested in that, are you doing that at a distance now? If people are looking for, you know, like one-on-one coaching and or you know, therapy, if people wanted to, you know, reach out to you for that, how can they do that?
Sure, absolutely. I do for a couple of days a week, largely because the demand for a vegan psychologist is very, very high. And there are a lot of vegan psychologists out there, but they won't call themselves vegan.
Mm,
And I encourage people to get out there and speak. You know, if you have an interest in social equality in other areas, gay and lesbian or Christian or something like that, you call yourself a Christian counselor or a, you know, working with drug addiction. You give away your values all the time just by
mm.
choosing where you work.
It makes
So there's a
sense
lot
to
of
do
people there.
that.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's also what you've devoted your life to in terms of expertise and gathering information and solutions and
Because
help.
then you can find the relatable people, right? You can
Yeah,
find the best possible people. You can
absolutely.
help the most, you can relate the most with them, right? And
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. So I do see people, but the demand is so great that I'm actually just about to release a suite of courses and an online interactive
Ooh.
overcoming dystopia course, and also one on steps to better relationships, looking at individual intimate relationships, groups, work and family. So that'll be coming out imminently.
Oh, very
And
nice.
but yes, I do see people, mostly around the world, through a confidential platform called Blue Jeans. And yeah, people can get hold of me by veganpsychologist.com. And
Great.
yes. But you know,
Great.
I
Well,
will say something, Jason, is in this, I've encouraged psychologists to come out of the woodwork and actually call themselves that. And they're afraid, well, what about my non-vegan clients? I do have non-vegan clients. I see amazed they don't Google me. They get recommended or they find me in the past. I've spoken somewhere. But even when they do find that out, some of them don't mind. And then, of course, I'm
mm,
able to tease in, rightly so, usually through health and, you know, a little segue to waking them up to everything that contributes to their well-being or their conscience or whatever.
mhm.
And I do have some success stories there of people really looking a little
That's good.
further and watching other videos and going, oh my gosh, this isn't about health, Claire, it's about ethics. I said, no, that's just the hidden secret that your health will exponentially improve on a whole food plant-based diet. Um, but
Yeah.
Jason, I have been inundated, and I say inundated, and yes, people contacting me offline saying, I am so pleased you're speaking out as you are, that you've got the guts to do it. But I don't want to go online and say anything in response because I can't bear the attacks from other people. And I encourage people to stand up because, you know, it's not about who's right and who's wrong here, but freedom of speech and freedom of thought is absolutely essential. We cannot help animals get out of conditions that we can't even imagine. Our incarceration is nothing compared to theirs. We're
I
doing it luxury.
I want to hang out on this point right here for a minute, because I think that, coming back to what you said before, about, you said something to the extent that, like, you know, if people don't really understand what's going on, right, that, like, that's sort of the reason that people just don't understand. People haven't like gone in depth to really grasp the reality of what's happening to
Yeah,
animals. And if they did have sufficient
yeah,
understanding, then like you're basically either a psychopath, or you are, you're gonna start moving towards wanting to be vegan. Like
mm,
it's just that feeling, as you spoke to, the experience you had when you were young. That feeling of right and wrong. I think the more you expose the reality, you're just inevitably moving that, that feeling. It's not a good feeling. Nobody gets a good feeling from watching slaughterhouse footage, right?
that's right. You
So
know, you're absolutely right. It's and I think let's just back up a tiny bit. Is um, when people really know and they really grasp what's going on, they're caught in the grip of I either contribute it or I don't. In theory, yeah, you must be a psychopath if you really get and you say that's okay. And then the majority of people don't think it's okay. They refuse to see it, as you know, or they will elect to go along with what's known as psychic defenses. And I've sort of made this a little bit more accessible to people through the notion of myths, unquestioned assumptions, the shoulds, the oughts, and the musts. So when someone, let's say, you're out there outreaching on the street and someone catches an image of, and they stop to see a video and they say, oh, this can't be happening in our country. Oh, this must be just some bad people. This is a load of bad apples. This doesn't normally happen. If it happens anywhere, it's bad enough. But we know that what we're showing you is the tip of the iceberg. It's when we show them earthlings or dominion or whatever
right.
is the reality of, and but people then elect to do it. Now, are they psychopaths? If they look at it and say, I don't really care, or I want to actively involve in it, yes, they probably would be. But majority of people don't. And I remember a woman in outreach once on the street, and she said, oh my gosh, this is awful, this is terrible. And I don't want to, how can I do something? And then we looked at the natural solution, of course, is to firstly stop financing the industry and stop consuming animals. And then she started to change and try to resist. Now, it would have been very easy to assume that she didn't care, or it was nothing more inconsequential than her taste buds. And I kept drilling down. I said, look, what's the bottom line here? You obviously feel this is wrong. I can see it, your tears in your eyes. And the solution is very simple, and yet you're resisting it. And she said, my marriage is on the rocks. My mother-in-law doesn't like me. I come from an Italian family. I'm already
Mm,
criticized.
mm-hmm,
I honestly don't know how I'm going to go back and tell people that suddenly I'm vegan.
mm-hmm.
But that for her, now, is she a psychopath? No, but she needs to assimilate that information. She's only been standing there for 10 minutes and finding out. And it's very easy to judge. So I think it's very the myths, the unquestioned assumptions is, well, if everyone else is doing it, it must be okay. Or we were always brought up with meat and 2 veg. What's the problem? It would never happen if the government would never allow it. It's all these social assumptions and
Mm-hmm.
cultural assumptions that keep people locked, because if they break them, they have to realize, as we're realizing with the current crisis, is the world is very uncertain, is that these aren't fixed, they're social constructs that then become norms. And many of them don't work for us. They certainly don't work for the animals. And whenever we see pushback socially by, I remember when I was a youngster, if people wanted to live out of wedlock, it was a dreadful thing. And often parents didn't go to their weddings. Now we think, what are they talking about? That was a pushback. But at the time, that was a social and cultural assumption that you weren't committed, or you were living in sin, or some other ridiculous notion that we laugh at. And so, but the same thing happens with animal, what we eat and put in our mouths.
I'm imagining sort of this spectrum of somebody who is learning about what is really happening. And, on the one end, you have somebody who's really understands everything. They're vegan. They're, in line. They may not know absolutely everything, but they grasp sort of enough of the picture that, they want to be, they know they want to be vegan. And then on the other hand, we have people who are just totally caught up in, believing in these myths, as you sort of, we're talking about, if we want to call them myths, or they have certain circumstances in their lives that would make it very difficult for them if they were to go vegan. They're worried about conflict with their family or with their job, or, whatever it may be that is preventing them from being sort of ready to see the entirety. And that's when I see, I mean, when we're out there doing activism on the streets, and, you know, say you're standing in the cube of truth and you're watching people walk by, I see that when people look at the footage and you can tell, like, they just start to get into it, and then they sort of realize what it is and that they're not ready. Like, they're just like, I can't deal. I just cannot deal with that. And then they're off, you know? But then the people who are ready, I mean, how do you, I mean, this is something I'd really love to ask you, Claire, is why aren't people vegan? Why don't people go vegan? Can we summarize that somehow?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's still a bit of a mystery to me, because as soon as you see something or an injustice, to me, they should see a part of that footage and they should be vegan immediately. There's no question. Yeah, they should be, shouldn't they? Because the horror of what's going on here is, in fact, I just saw something on social media this morning, a meat works closing down. I think there were 2 dead meat workers and 6 infected with COVID ID. So they closed down the slaughterhouse. Hello, what about the millions of sentient creatures that died at the hands of that industry? It just even in that meatworks. What about the slaughterhouse workers who probably they are minimum wage people. Some are psychopaths, but some are actually trying to feed their family and are traumatized and brutalized having to go and do those jobs. What about that? You know, so, you know, we've got a sort of moral, sort of, some writers have called it a moral schizophrenia, and that's not in any way to undermine anyone's suffering in any way from any labeled, you know,
Right.
life conditions.
Right. But
But
it
it
paints the
is this.
picture.
It's bizarre that people won't change. It does, absolutely. So, you know, in many ways, this is why I love the Cube of Truth, and there's an article actually on the Vegan Psychologist about this. Why do the masks work? I'm a great advocate of the masks. See, when we're talking to someone in the street, if we were just showing slaughterhouse footage and showing them this, and then they know that we are holding up the footage on a Saturday afternoon in our free time. They know we have a position on it. So they not only have to feel something in relation to the footage, they then have to deal with someone they know has got a position on it, and they're going to have no excuse to not do what the solution's going to be offered. Then they actually, so in other words, you've got this interpersonal dynamics going on between people. Even worse in our family, because you've got a whole history of raised eyebrows and tiny little facial expressions that bring back myriads of memories and family fallouts and arguments over Thanksgiving or something.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't, unconscious all this is, of course, but when they're standing in a Cube of Truth with someone with a mask on, it gives us a bit of an insight as to why people don't become vegan, full stop. They are forced to see the footage, and even if only momentarily, forced to feel their emotions in relation to it. They cannot shoot the messenger or subtly do something to stop having to deal with the shame and the guilt, actually, in a moment when someone says, well, what do you think about it? Okay, we give them a few moments to look, and then someone else talks to them. They're not the person who's shown them the footage. He's absolutely inspired the model. But when we're talking to other people, they're, you know, these psychic defenses, because when people work through dystopia, you know, the anguish of being a vegan, the trance-like collusion with stuff we didn't even know, and we're dealing with this trance-like collusion at the moment with lots of other things, and we'll come back to that. But then well, what else don't I know? There's your conspiracy theorist. Well, actually, there's a heck of a lot we don't know. We never have the full picture anyway. Is people said, well, I can process some of these emotions. It's painful living in a non-vegan world, but I can let that pass through my body's powerful strategies we can teach people and become active. That's the best way to deal with dystopia, is get out there and do something. But they still won't change. I can't believe it. And that's why I wrote Myths of Choice, why people won't change and what we can do about it. And to actually us examine ourselves is because we have resistance. Seeing what's going on at the moment and the resistance to ideas gives us absolute insight as to why people won't become vegan. We are doing it in relation to any other ideas at the moment. We cannot, if you think about it, people go, you're a conspiracy theorist because you brought something up. You know, I'm absolutely blown away with some of the videos that I've put up there, and people attack me for saying my career will be over, as if that's something I think about, my reputation and career, when we're speaking the truth. If I worried about that, I wouldn't be talking about veganism. Lost a lot of friends, not all my non-vegan friends. it's not about us. It's about something much bigger here. But the resistance is they start to blame the person I've used in the example, for instance, or
Yep.
that gives us insight, because in that moment they have to live with the uncertainty of not knowing. Is, oh my gosh, what is the truth? What if it's not the whole picture? Perhaps, are we going down the route of a totalitarian state? I think we're at the crossroads and we're going one way or the other. I'm pretty positive, and I try to, but we've got to wake up pretty quickly. So, but when it comes to veganism, people of way we were all brought up, everything we've stood for, our parents told us the right thing, sitting around the family dinner table, and then suddenly we are horrified at what's been going on, but we suddenly have to question our parents. Why didn't they tell us? Why didn't they ask questions? What else don't I know? And for some people, it is so great, that feeling of existential uncertainty, which we're seeing at the moment with, oh my gosh, we're all going to die. Yeah, we're all going to die. We always were going to die. We just think we're going to get this, which very few people, by the way, have died of, and most of them in their 80s and 90s, is actually, therefore, it's the resistance to that. We want certainty. No, it can't be true. Let's go back to our normal lives, even if they weren't working for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very difficult thing, I think, for people to think in such large numbers. I mean, when I say large numbers, I mean, when we're talking thousands and thousands of people who generally, like at this point, I think a lot of people know maybe of somebody who may have, tested positive for, COVID or whatever. Like there is a little bit of personal connection, but for the most part, it's still, at least at this point, we're trying to conceive of like these numbers that like they start by, there's one person infected in this area, and then there's 10, and then it, there's all these analyses happening of, how exactly what's happening to the curve, and like what's effective and what's not effective. There's all these conversations happening, and it's very, I think, difficult for people to, comprehend, just how big of a threat is this? Because, if you compare the numbers to, say, heart disease or cancer, or, and what's the effect happening on the roads? Like now people are getting, or at least around where I live, people are getting, rebates on their insurance policies because they're not driving. So there's not, there's less deaths happening on the roads. And like,
Yep.
so there's all these conversations that I think for me make it kind of difficult to, I mean, it's like, what do you do? Like, what do you do? Like, I do not have, like, how anybody can go out there and say on, on social media, or, in conversations or whatever, however anybody can put up this front that like, this is the easy solution. I kind of envy that, because to me, it's extremely complicated. And for me, that's the value of having some of these, discussions around some of the topics that you're bringing up. And then people give you a hard time for bringing up these topics because maybe they can't have just a set, position and argue so easily, because it's very difficult to like, get into all the details of everything. So, it's do you have any ideas on perhaps how can we start having some of these conversations, these controversial conversations?
Sure.
Like, what's a way that we can sort of see through all of this mayhem happening right now?
Sure. Well, I encourage people to do research, and people don't know what research is. They think it's social media or mainstream. I mean, you just said something a moment ago, and this is very powerful language in the media, is everyone knows someone who's been infected. Infection means that a virus has entered your body. Our bodies are full of viruses. Now, let me repeat that. Our bodies are full of viruses. A virus is something that enters the cell and changes the DNA. It's happening all the time. Guess what? A robust immune system is there fighting it off all the time. I think there probably is, and it is a COVID-19. However, the word infection doesn't mean you're going to get ill. It means something's entered your body. I can be in front of someone with a common cold and be infected. Doesn't mean I'm going to get ill. My body goes, hey, I'm going to do my normal job, which is my immune system. I'll just fight that off. Okay. If we're run down, or if we are eating an animal-based diet, oh gosh, Claire's now going to talk about health. How dare she? She's not a doctor. As soon as we don't like the message, people, immediately shoot the messenger. Well, I'm someone who's been eating for a long time, and I take great advice from people like Dr. Michael Clapper, Dr. Michael Greger, Neil Barnard, Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. I've shared the stage with some of these people. Is, we don't have to have a PhD in nutrition to be able to talk about it, but we can refer to robust studies, and there's no shortage of evidence out there that whole food plant-based diet is the way to go. We know this. Is where that's what our immune system is there to do. So when we hear the word infection, it's, oh my gosh, everyone's going to die. When we actually look at the original person who came up with the test, now, don't quote me on this because I haven't got it in front of me. I think it was actually 1984, which is a little bit concerning because the book by George Orwell was 1984, of course. But whoever came up with the test, and please, yes, you can Google it, but look at some robust things. He said this must not be used for diagnostic purposes because the number of false positives is so high. And from memory, and I haven't got it in front of me, it was something like 80%.
Wow.
So if somebody just gives somebody a swab test and they go, oh my gosh, they've got a COVID, and there's lots of coronaviruses, by the way, they're in our bodies. Yeah. The flu is a coronavirus, is they will test positive. What has happened, in fact, on a press conference with the President of the United States recently, the lady who's in charge of the task force stood up and she was constantly asked by the media is, so how are you labeling people having coronavirus, COVID-19? And she said, to be on the safe side, if someone comes in and they test positive, we put them down as a coronavirus death. So somebody can go in, have a heart attack, test for coronavirus. Oh my God, they're added to the statistics. This was actually quoted in the White House. That's why, and I don't want to get too much into American politics, but again, if people don't like Trump, which the media don't like him, and I'm not saying where I stand on any of this, but they already criticized everything he said, is she said that on the thing. And that's why he's saying, well, look, we're going to be opening up America as well. We're very cautiously, and we've done our homework, is we've got to realize that people are not dying of this. They're actually, if they have a coronavirus of that type in their body, they are putting it down to it. There's also politics here. Is if somebody tests as positive on that with a swab test, there's a financial payment that goes to the hospital for putting them down as that. If they use the ventilator, I think on each person's record, the hospital receives 39,000 American dollars for putting them down as using a ventilator for this. I'm not saying they're being unethical, but if someone's just died, what are you going to do? Put it down as coronavirus and get 39,000, or say, no, they actually died of this? I'm just putting it out there. Okay. I'm not here to make it.
It's a possibility.
It's a possibility. And also that you'd say, well, gosh, we need the money for the hospital to deal with all these surgeries we're going to have after this event. Not good, bad people, but, erring on the side of caution. The Italian health minister has come out and said, we were overcautious in our statistics. And it is probably the deaths we've talked about and the infections is probably only 12% of actually what we quoted. But suddenly the world says, oh my gosh, they're in lockdown and probably need to be. They've also got a negative birth rate. So they've got a high aging population. Now, we're not here necessarily to talk about politics, but I think as vegans, we need to open our eyes and say to people, it's not about whether you agree with something that's come out of Claire's mouth or Jason's mouth at the moment, because we're all asking questions. We never have the whole situation. But what I do know is we cannot rely on mainstream media, which is owned by 6 major corporations, to tell us the truth. Okay? That is not their job. They're there to pay shareholders, to have sensation and whatever. Of course, there's elements of truth in it. But we also know that they're not, and the journalists are in paid positions and influenced enormously by what they're told to print.
I would also add, too, that we cannot rely only on our algorithmic preferential Facebook feeds, that are only showing us what we want to see, or our Instagram feeds or whatever. We have to really go out of our way, I think, to expose ourselves to people who may think differently than us, and to listen to, I think ideally, listen. I mean, I don't know about you. I really enjoy, listening to some of the, just finding really intelligent people in any field, that's interesting, and just getting a taste of, what are the people who really know the topic saying about that topic, rather than listening to people who don't know about the topic saying something like, one example would be Chris Kressler, who went on the Joe Rogan podcast. I don't know if you saw that interview, but he goes on and he tries to talk about debunking this film, and he gets absolutely schooled when James Wooks comes on to defend it, because he was talking about a field that he has no idea. He doesn't know how to talk. He's not an expert. So I think that's one place to start with, having these sort of nuanced conversations. It's like, who are we listening to? Who is giving this, opinion on a very complex, topic, whether it's, a virus or whether it's an environmental thing, whatever it is that we're talking about, right? So,
and have a look at Dr. Shiva. Dr.
Okay.
Shiva is, I think he's running for Senate actually in the US. I'm calling him obviously from Australia at the moment. Have a look at some of his work on incredibly highly credentialed individual who just gives us all the science about this stuff. Go and look at Michael Greger's work on, how not to die from a pandemic or something. And there's actually a summit coming up. Tomorrow, I think it starts with Michael Clapper and a number of them looking at health and things during these times. But there's something I just want to just say about, we've used the word conspiracy theory. And this is where we really need to do our homework. And most of us don't have time to do this. We're not historians, but we've got to not rely on those algorithmic, things that just come up in our feed. The word conspiracy theory, or the term, was created by the CIA after the assassination of Kennedy. And it was used to debunk and discredit anybody who questioned the mainstream narrative. That's where the term conspiracy theory comes from. So as soon as we hear conspiracy theory, we raise our eyebrows and we go, little green men. Now we've got to realize that Hollywood is I think owned by about 80% of the Pentagon. So do we honestly think that that's going to be a neutral thing that comes out and we would just want to entertain people with movies? I think the recent documentary that's come out, which is called Out of Shadows, highlights how Hollywood is linked with celebrities and is actually influencing, what we consume in some of the darker side. Actually, I do recommend people watch this. So
that sounds super. What was that again? Sorry, was that a...
Yes, of course. Out of Shadows, it's
Out
called.
of Shadows.
And it's a little confronting because it's really talking about some of the dark side of what is going on behind the scenes in terms of abuse issues. But it's actually, people need to see it. Within about 6 days, I think it had 7 million views. And it's tried to be brought down by different platforms, but it is readily available. But these are confronting things for us. Again, we go, what's the truth? How do we work through this? Is we do have to keep an open mind. And that means if someone says, if you say to me, look, Claire, all these people are dying of coronavirus, if I immediately say, oh, don't be silly, Jason, no, they're not, I've cut off an avenue that actually maybe Jason knows something that Claire doesn't. So as I say, as we're doing outreach, if somebody asks us something, we don't just barrage them with information. We use the Socratic method. We ask questions. So if somebody says something, look, what about this? Say, okay, well, it feels a bit out there for me, Claire, but tell me more. You perhaps know something I don't. And then I've looked at this. What do you think of this? Increase the dialogue. Because once we polarize, there are powers that be will not just take opportunity as if it's by chance. They are actively planning to reduce, I believe, our civil liberties. Now that's not conspiracy, that's fact. Go and have a look at it. Little things like Zuckerberg has just come out today and said that anyone who I was trying to think of the context of that. He wants to stop anyone challenging the narrative, basically. And it was actually about protests against lockdowns in the US. Any organizers to say, look, we're not going to do that. I think it's in Michigan they're coming out, or Massachusetts or something. And he's stopping them because that's against the public good. Who gets to decide what is the public good? Right. In Nazi Germany, lockdowns were happening. There was a resistance there that said, well, maybe we need to question the narrative. Yeah. So the worst thing is that's happening at the moment is neighbors are dobbing in their neighbors. They're going onto some government site in Australia, for instance, and saying, well, their neighbors are out spending too much time in the garden. This happened in Nazi Germany. You got the prisoners actually, or the people going along with just one way of thinking to actually get other people to attack other people. Now, obviously, if, you know, it's okay to go to the supermarket. So we need to wake up, we need to ask questions, we need to realize that we don't never have the whole truth. But at the moment, I think for vegans and activists is, well, what's happening to the animals, you know? And we have because they're suffering, their incarceration. I watched a wonderful, I listened, I'm just about to mail it out actually to people, Vegan Nation radio program coming out of Massachusetts. I would highly recommend. Okay, Vegan Nation with Marlene Narrow. And she just interviewed Dr. Will Tuttle on there. And he does this beautiful way of bringing together all the different strands. And he basically said is that the animals we're advocating for, we are getting a tiny glimpse of what it's like for our rights to be stripped, our voices. And now we're even talking about ID chips. Isn't that like ear tags? Numbers? You know, it's nothing in terms of their suffering, but we are reaping to some extent what we've been sowing. And he's encouraging us on. I really suggest people listen to that latest interview on there, is to actually realize that everything, we're a systemic arrangement here, that everything that happens within us, between us, behind closed doors, it all it's a projection of what we call our shadow in many ways. And so if we just keep throwing solutions without actually looking at how we all live together, where do we oppress others? We may not be doing everything to not oppress animals, but are we attacking other vegans? Are we shouting people down and criticizing them? Are we attacking non-vegans and saying, I hate humans? That's not a very vegan thing to do. We were once in the dark too. We need to clean our own house up first, allow this, and they're powerful. I've got lots of free sort of things on my website to get people to process this emotion and discourage. We need to learn to live with uncertainty and the existential reality that we're not gods, goddesses in terms of living forever. And then we need to take massive action and be advocating for animals right now and getting people to make the connections between how we treat the vast number of sentient beings on this earth with really what is starting to manifest in our society.
Yeah, I think that what you said there about us, sort of reaping what we've sown. I mean, I think that's why when we talk about getting people to wake up and to see what's happening to animals and to look at the footage and to think about things like what you were saying, asking questions and getting people to the point where they're open to exploring that which they do not know and letting their guard down regarding the things that they don't know, for the purpose of being realistic about where our values are at. I mean, we're basically denying, right, as a species, as a society, whatever you want to say, we're sort of denying this massive part of our existence, like what we're doing. Like, it is physically, in terms of the amount of space that animal agriculture takes up on the planet, it's massive. In terms of the economic weight of it all is massive. It's a huge part of what we're doing as human beings. And we like to think that we have this thing called humanity, but is our sort of vision of humanity what we like to think, sort of the best of humankind? What does our best behavior look like? What is the best version of ourselves? This idea we have versus the reality of the actions we're taking to these animals. It's people aren't looking at this very dark side of what we're doing. And all we're doing as vegans really is saying, hey, can we look at this? And can we actually honestly think about this? Because I was talking about this to someone earlier today. A lot of these excuses or these reasons that people have, they don't even really believe them. And that's I think part of why conversations about veganism are so painful for non-vegans. You can just tell how uncomfortable they are, because they're bringing up these excuses that they've probably been fed by their parents or their teachers or whoever. And not to put blame, this is a perpetual cycle, right? And when they sort of come up with these arguments, I think they sort of know on some level that they're not a lot of these arguments or these reasons for not being vegan, they're not very good reasons. They're not very logical. And so I think that creates a lot of frustration when they're having these conversations and they take it out of the vegans. So this is something that I wanted to ask you about this current time right now. We have a lot of people who are home because, no matter what you believe, in a lot of places, people are being forced to stay inside. And that's the matter of fact reality is, people are in close quarters, oftentimes with family members who maybe aren't vegan. And I think that probably what's happening right now is there are some people who are maybe in some uncomfortable situations with family members. And I would love to hear you speak a little bit to coping with family situations, coping with situations, maybe people in close quarters with non-vegans. Is this the time to be advocating? Is this the time to not be saying anything? What are your thoughts on that?
It's, oh my gosh, I've been talking to clients actually who are in this awful situation of being, the strategies people normally have to deal with their relationships often are that people go out to work every day, or they go to the gym, or they go to the pub, or they do something,
Uh-huh.
but they have time away.
Yes.
In every day, two non-vegans living together or family, there's enormous pressures of people having to confront and actually learn very different strategies to deal with conflict and set boundaries and things. When we're living with non-vegans, as we know, it's excruciatingly painful to watch people feed off the flesh and the reproductive secretions of the tortured souls, as I say, I always say, don't advocate around the dinner table, is when someone's just about to eat something. And if you choose to sit around that table with people eating animals, that's not a judgment. Everyone has to make their own judgment where they stand on this. For some people, it's an opportunity to advocate and shown to be a reasonable person. For other people, myself included, have taken a liberation pledge in that sense. I won't sit around and do that. But we have to decide where we are. But if you're a young person, maybe in your teens, or living with non-vegans, it takes a lot of strength, and at a time when we all need social support, at a time of uncertainty, is, how do you deal with that? It's number one, when people are putting food in their mouth, probably not the best time to talk about animal cruelty issues, because people will resist that. And understandably so, because we're basically saying what you're doing is what I'm telling you about. It is the time to advocate, always the time to advocate, but you need to speak to people in the language they understand. If it's like being on the street or, at work or something, and someone asks about, well, where do you get your protein? Can't believe that question keeps getting asked.
Me neither.
Suddenly everyone becomes a dietitian. Actually, in our current crisis, have you noticed everyone overnight is an immunologist?
Oh, yes.
It's amazing how this acceleration of skill level happens by
It
being
is.
naughty.
It
Yeah,
is.
absolutely. But if they come and ask us about our protein and we say, well, who cares about your flipping protein? Do you know what's happening to animals? They're going to think we're weird. Whereas if you answer that, always answer with a question, and this will be some tools that we can also use when we're sitting around with a family, if someone says, where do you get your protein from? Part of me wants to say something sarcastic. Do you know how many times we've been asked this?
Yeah.
We have to judge the situation, okay? If it was someone I didn't know, I would be saying, well, okay, well, just so I can, there's a lot of ways to answer that, but just so I can know, where are you coming from? Are you a nutritionist, or are you Bob the mechanic around the corner? And you get an idea. When we ask someone a question, firstly, they feel they're being listened to, even if it's just to say, where are you coming from? They can't tell us we're preaching. Or if someone says, well, I'm a doctor of nutrition or whatever, that your answer needs to be a little bit different. Always ask a question. So, if your family is saying, look, how dare you bring up at this time, it's not a time to advocate for animals, okay? It's just the time to advocate for animals. It's always the time. But instead of going, oh, yes, it is. Do you know we don't get coronaviruses from fruit and vegetables? It's all comes from zoonotic diseases. That's true. Then it's going to resist us. And you say, well, what do you mean by that? Never ask someone, well, why shouldn't I advocate? Why shouldn't we be talking about this? Ask what or how or when. This is really important, because when we ask someone why, they will come up with a defensive response to justify what they're doing. Okay, Jason, why didn't you come to my party on Saturday? If you value our relationship, you couldn't be bothered to get out of bed. You're going to give me all sorts of excuses and go, oh, I felt unwell and did whatever. If I say, hey, Jason, I really missed you on Saturday. What happened? You're going to go, oh, Claire, I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. I was so tired. I had a terrible week. I feel awful about it. And I should have called you, because you know I'm not judging you. I just missed you, and say, hey, what happened? So when our family go, now is not the time to do it. Well, what do you mean by that? You know, when would be a time? And then, are you aware of what's, you know, some of the connections? In other words, these other questions enable us to gather information rather than actually have to justify where we're coming from. Be curious with family members. You know, it's like, don't say, this is what's happening. How can you be so awful? And even if it wasn't happening, we shouldn't be doing it towards animals, which I have to be right. We have no right, except our speciesism, to think we can do it to one animal. Is actually saying to people, you know, we've all been lied to here. You know, I was reading the other day, I was listening to, you know, Dr. Will Tuttle or something, and he said X, Y, Z. What do you think about that? So engage your non-vegan family members in a bit of a dialogue around breaking them out of the trance of generally by asking questions. Or if they say, you know, gosh, why can't you just sit and have a meal with us? For goodness sake, you're always having to go. And what do you think the reason is that I keep wanting to do that, Mum? Not why. What do you think the reason is? Well, I just think you want to tell everyone what to do. Actually, it's not that, Mum. It's okay. Can I tell you what the reason is? Now, unless Mum is really never wants to listen to her daughter, she's going to go, well, okay, what is that then? Well, Mum, when I found out about what happens to animals, and I also realized that the enormous physical suffering and the illnesses that come from that, I had to look further. And I'm a little mystified, Mum, as to why you won't look at that. And, you know, or I was listening the other day to Dr. Asher Akhtar on the vegan couple. And, you know, she uncovered, you know, what was really going on. It says Center of Disease Control, for instance. You see what I mean? You start to engage Mum or Dad in a conversation, because it's all about sowing seed. We want to create doubt in people's minds. But the hardest thing is trying to change our family because of all those social dynamics. They saw you when you fell over the step when you were 3 years old, and now you're suddenly going to tell them they have to change their whole lives. Sometimes people can't take that, unfortunately. And there's a lot of members of my extended family that are not vegan. There's members of my family that have cut off connection with me. They think I'm preaching to them. And if I ask them, and I ask them, what do you mean by that? Well, we don't like your posts. I said, I don't think I like my posts either. Because actually, I don't want to, you know, tell you about what's going on. However, what do you think about the content of what I'm doing? Yeah. So it's challenging. Usually it's other people that will, outside our family. It's very hard to influence our family to change, particularly parents and extended family. You know, I'm very lucky that my partner, when I came back from living in New Zealand, and we left because of what we came across with pig dog hunting and horrible hunting culture in the dairy industry. And I'd been vegetarian for 30 years at that time, thinking I was doing the right thing. He said, no, we're going to look further. And he went and looked at all these videos. You can imagine Meet Your Meat and Earthlings and things. And then he said, well, sorry, we've got to sit down and watch them. And we did. And we all became vegan on the spot. And so I'm one of those lucky people and a lot of people are lucky in that way. But my extended family, you know, they're not quite there yet. And but that's okay. You know, it's so being at home, self-care is absolutely essential. You know, find powerful ways to allow things to move through your body. There's some free programs on Vegan Psychologist, some of the resources. And if you want to know why they're not changing, have a look at veganpsychologist.com/myths, MYTHS, and there's a 4-part free video program on trying to look at some of those mental blocks, those social and cultural limitations, and that's probably going to help with helping and talking to family as well.
That was veganpsychologist.org/myths.
.com.
.com.
Yeah.
Veganpsychologist.
/myths. Absolutely. And there's another one. This is veganpsychologist.com/virus, which is a video informational thing.
I saw that one.
How to cope when global fear goes viral. Yes. And people can access that original one. So, you know, that would be hopefully helpful. And but be advocating as well. You know, online. hone your skills, get really good, practice, set up connections, because there will be a time when we come out and the animals are going to need us more than ever.
Yeah, I think that, just to go back, I mean, to your example, I mean, you know, you're very experienced at, you know, outreaching and advocating and talking about veganism. I mean, you know, just as good as probably anybody out there. I mean, a lot of people would love to be able to advocate for the animals as you do, and yet still you have, you know, family members or extended family or whatever who's, you know, it's I guess the point being that people shouldn't put too much pressure on themselves, right? Like, it's not always about how well you're advocating. Like, we can try to ask all the right questions, and we can try to get people thinking, we can do our best, you know, but at the end of the day, you know, if mom or dad just aren't ready, like we said, for whatever reason in their own you know, psychology, in their own, where they are in their life, if for whatever reason they're just not ready to you know, pull back that curtain and face this reality, then you have to accept, you know, there's only so much you can do to control it, right? And people
Absolutely.
shouldn't feel the
Yeah.
blame
It's
on
about sowing
themselves.
seeds, isn't it? And I say meeting people where they're at. So, say for instance, Mum's a feminist and she's been advocating for women for a long time, but she won't become vegan, or she's vegetarian and continues to eat, you know, the babies of this awful industry, the dairy and eggs and things. Is she just can't see it. She won't see, you know, dairy is scary or whatever. By dear colleague of mine, is how can we get them to do it? Flip to the relationship. When mum goes, oh no, I don't want to see that. Whenever we see people go, oh my gosh, don't tell me, we get infuriated. But if they went, don't care, they're your problem people. The ones that go, don't show me, a good question firstly is to ask them, what, okay, we won't look at it. What is it you think you're going to see? You don't let them get away with it, because it's there in
That's a
their
good
mind. When
one.
they've cringed, they've made an association. And so, okay, well, what is it you think I'm going to show you, mum? Oh, I'm going to see this awful thing. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And those little babies that are taken away. You know, first time I saw a baby calf and the mother, you know, just given birth, and she's running out, she's stumbling, mum. It's, you know, you're appealing to mum's feminism as well. And then
Oh, but I don't
flip
want
to
to
the,
hear it. I don't want to think about it.
that's right. So yeah, exactly, is I appreciate that, mum, nor do I. So agree with mum. No, I can absolutely understand it, mum. And then you flip to the relationship. And if you've got a good relationship with mum, and mum considers herself, or dad does for whatever other reason, you know, maybe not the feminism, sorry, the motherhood, the fatherhood bit,
Right.
or whatever, is say, mum, I'm so sad that we're not as close as we were. Now, if mum is concerned about her mothering and wants to be close to her son or daughter or whatever, she'll say, oh, don't be silly, of course. Well, I just don't feel you understand me anyway. You just don't listen to me. Of course I listen to you, darling. And then you could say, well, actually, you don't. And you want mum to say, well, why do you say that? And you say, mum, because something so fundamental to my life has changed it beyond thing, you won't even look at it. So it's okay. But honestly, I'm just sad that we're no longer as close as we were. So you've actually started to make mum uncomfortable, is because she now got a problem with mothering or her family falling apart. And you haven't judged. And then she said, well, I just can't watch it. I appreciate that, mum, but it's okay, but we're just not as close. Mum now has to live with the tension of, do I want to be close to my daughter or son? And do I then have to watch it? That feminist thing I brought up a
Wow.
moment ago is saying mum is really there for the women. You've actually got to get into her and actually say, look, I'm just struggling a bit here, mum, because, you know, you're a feminist and it's absolutely fantastic what you've been doing, you know, speaking out for females and not wanting their reproductive system to be exploited. And yet I'm just struggling here, mum, because every day, and the milk you put in your coffee and the cheese you put on the platter, that is actually exploiting females here. How does that work, mum? You see what I mean? As opposed to you're a hypocrite, mum.
Hmm.
Or, you know, let's have a look at the enormous abuse of male animals in the industry. Horrible semen collecting stations for pigs or things. Is, you know, if that's all about guys' rights, or, you know, and quite rightly, you know, about, you know, strong masculine, you know, role types, you know, powerful, good ways to be male in this society, is actually say, look, you be concerned about what they're doing to these poor animals. They're just machines that are just being used. What, in other words, use whatever it takes to get in to talk to people in the language or the things they're already concerned about. If it's health, if it's environment, don't get quick to call them a hypocrite. Answer them, champion what they're doing, and then just expand that window of compassion. ultimately they've got to connect with the suffering of the animals, or else they'll just, if they do it for their own sakes, suddenly everyone's out there doing climate marches because we're afraid we're going to, suffer. What an indictment on our society that we only come to do something when it affects us. So we need people to connect with the suffering animals, but meet them in the light where they're actually at the moment.
Yeah, I love that. I really like that idea surrounding, because it almost sounded to me as though, like, when you were talking about, if you're talking with your mom and you want to say, look, I'd really like to talk with you about this, but I guess we can't because, I guess we're just not able to connect on a level, like, maybe we're not so close as we might think we are. Like, when you were saying that, in my mind, on one level, it was almost hitting me like, wait a minute, is that being manipulative? But then when I thought more about it, no, it's not. It's being honest. It's calling it what it is. Because
Yes.
I think a lot of parents, maybe, or a lot of, whatever the relationship may be, a lot of people sort of dismiss how important veganism is to people who are vegan, right?
Yeah.
They sort of dismiss it as like, oh, you're just doing this because I don't know, I don't really get it. I think they probably don't really get it. They probably don't, like. And then if you come out and you say, like, look, this is really important to me, I would really like to have this conversation with you so that you can understand me, because I want you to understand me, then you're opening that door for them to say, okay, like, yes, I do want to be close and I do want to understand. So, and I will, sort of sacrifice my discomfort in this conversation for the purpose of our relationship. And I don't think that that's being manipulative at all. I think that's just good communication.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also about intention, isn't it? If someone's deliberately trying to push someone into changing their mind for their own self-serving purposes, but we're there, the voice for animals. And I think there's a really big difference to that. That's right. But imagine times in our history, and it still happens today. Say a young person goes and they want to tell their family they're gay, and in some families still, sadly, they would, oh, we're not even going to talk about it. We're not going to tell the neighbors. We're not, it's similar thing is in the poor male or female to actually say, look, I just feel so sad that it's something that's so important to me that you're not able to, to talk about it. We would be horrified. The person wouldn't open up, and it often makes huge division in families. This is something that's fundamentally the philosophy by which we live our lives. And there's no bad news about veganism. That's the whole thing. I remember when I became vegan, it was like, we became vegan before we knew there was a word for it, which is quite interesting. I didn't realize, I thought a vegan was a fussy vegetarian. It's
a fussy vegetarian.
A fussy vegetarian, it's like, couldn't be further from the truth. It's so, but I didn't know. So the key thing is the majority of people don't want to hurt animals, and they don't realize how, it doesn't matter who does the hit, if someone's paying for it, they are culpable in it once they've actually found out, as we know. But it's actually waking people up to that. But there's actually another program which I know we've talked about, is Vegan Voices, which is 30 days of mini videos on how to talk about veganism. That's actually on the Vegan Psychologist as well, and people can get 30 mini videos. And yeah.
That's awesome. I'm writing all this stuff down. I'll put in the show notes for anybody watching after. There'll be a whole bunch of resources that people can go to check out, which is amazing. Right. Claire, I could talk to you forever. I don't want to take up too much of your time. Is there anything? I mean, I think we've given people some good things, some good insights, some valuable tools that they can use in this interesting time that we're in. Is there anything else that you wanted to add or touch on today?
Oh, probably not. Just to say thank you for all the work you're doing, and to everybody listening, is thank you for everything you're doing for animals, and in turn that affects humans and the planet. Is, do not be put off by any resistance you get back to. We've already, you've overcome that. You won't be listening to this sort of podcast if you're not vegan. Is, you haven't actually aligned your life with your values. I say to people, most people are vegan except they eat meat. You'll go, what does that mean? Is, it's a philosophy of the non-use and exploitation of animals. Is most people, vast majority of people don't want to do that. But the reality is, unless we make that stand, we will be contributing to that. So I encourage people to, make that stand, align your values with your actions. Because then, everything sort of falls into place. And one of the things I found when I first I didn't realize I was vegan, but became vegan, if it was the worst diet on earth, I would have done it. And then suddenly you have this apparition. It's like, not only the you can live, it's actually, when you have a whole food plant-based diet, it's the best diet. There's all the evidence is out there from the China study. Environmentally, it's one of the biggest contributors, animal agriculture, to climate destruction, ocean dead zones. And so there's no bad news here. Spiritually, conscience-wise, I've never eaten as well. Have a look at onegreenplanet.org. 10,000 recipes, all your favorites, and your health will improve, your awareness, your mental acuity, and your conscience. And ultimately, we're learning to live alongside other sentient creatures on this planet. Now is our time in history to influence that trajectory towards something very positive, to really have a wake-up call here. If we don't, and we go down another path, we're looking at fascism, totalitarianism, and communism, which is a form of institutionalized control, really. It's not freedom. It's not the good part of socialism. And let's change the history here. Some people aren't going to become vegan through consciousness. It's something I actually realized is some people get it immediately. They make the emotional connection. It doesn't matter what it would do to their health or anything else. They're going to do it. Other people come through health or environment or something. Other people will do this when everyone else does it. Okay. They recycle, not because they're environmentalist. It's because that's what we do. Okay, so you've got to realize that. Choose your battles. We only need a core number of us. When in all tipping points, when it gets to about 16% of the population, there's this massive adoption of over 30% of what we call the early majority, and another 35% or something, the late majority. Some people, the last 7% are going to come. They're called the laggards in any social chain. You're only adopting of a new product, buying a mobile phone. It's Granny who says, well, if I don't get a phone, I won't be able to call my nephew.
Right.
You see, so is keep advocating for animals, get online, share things, hone your skills so that soon we can be back advocating for them. It's very important. And every time something comes out of your mouth on social media, are you doing it with love or are you doing it with fear? You're going to attack people, or you're going to get curious and ask a question or say, hey, I kind of don't go along quite with that. Tell me more. Then we're dealing with people with compassion, with the same treatment we want to be treated with.
You are such a wealth of wisdom, Claire. You really are a gift to the whole vegan movement, the animal rights movement. You're doing a great service, and I can't get enough of the things that you have to say. Like where do you get it all from? I don't know where it all comes from, but it's all great stuff. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. Well,
So
few great accomplishments are achieved single-handedly. I have to thank every person I've ever come into contact with, really. And, I have teachers and mentors, and I'm constantly learning and asking questions. And sometimes it's a young teenager will teach me something. I'll just give you a wonderful example in closing, if that's okay.
Sure.
Is people come to veganism in many ways. We always assume that we've got to tell them the information, they see it, and then we'll get them down the line, they'll come across. Some people come for all sorts of reasons. I remember somebody telling me in the middle of the Midwest in America, in a community where they had their own slaughterhouses in the village, dreadful place. And this young 15-year-old was watching The Simpsons. And they saw, and I can't think of the characters at the moment, they're watching The Simpsons, and someone walks in with a dead reindeer on their back in the cartoon and puts it on the table. And the mother says, how dare you? Don't you know my daughter's a vegetarian? And this young teenager is watching this in the deep Midwest of the States. And that teenager stopped watching this on her own, went out to the garden, said she looked at the sky, was out there for about an hour and thought, I wouldn't eat a reindeer. So why would I eat other animals? And in that moment, she became a vegan. Nobody had ever talked to her about it.
Wow.
Okay, that's what we call the collective unconscious. The more we put the seeds out to the universe, so to speak, when it starts to reach the tip, it will filter through another way. I've known people that fight veganism, and then one day the cat that they live with looks them in the eye and will not stop looking at them. And the person said, oh my gosh, there's a real person in there. And what if there's a real person inside every one of them? and they became vegan. So never assume that we know how it's going to happen, or that that little trickle in the lake is going to affect everything else. Just keep advocating without rage, without aggression. We all do it. We get angry at times. Of course we do. We get sarcastic because it hurts, you know, and we're human, and that's going to happen. But keep putting it out there, knowing that where you give out is not necessarily where it's going to come back. And someone else is going to reap the benefits of someone becoming vegan. They think, gosh, that was easy. You don't realize they had a lot of renditions before then to actually get that information.
I love it. That's a wonderful positive note to end it on, Claire. Thank you so much for your time today. And I hope to have you back on again at some point. Come back and let's follow up and see how this all pans out. Thank you so much, Claire.
Thank you.
Catch you next time on the Vegan Champion podcast.